In our last discussion, we examined how practice can slowly become performance. We looked at how meditation, ritual, language, and group expectations can gradually become visible markers of progress, and we explored how a practitioner can become increasingly skilled at appearing calm, centered, and insightful without necessarily addressing deeper confusion. Tonight we move into the next stage of that process, because whenever performance becomes established, authority soon follows. This is not unique to Zen. It happens in every human system. It happens in politics. It happens in corporations. It happens in universities. It happens in churches. And it happens in spiritual communities. Wherever there is uncertainty, people naturally begin looking for reference points. They look for examples. They look for guides. They look for individuals who appear further along the path than they are. There is nothing inherently wrong with this. Human beings learn through observation. We always have. The problem begins when the guide slowly becomes something more than a guide. When Zen first arrived in the West, many teachers carried an almost mythical status. They came from distant cultures. They spoke with unfamiliar rhythms. They embodied traditions most Western students knew very little about. To many seekers, they seemed to possess access to a hidden wisdom that had somehow been lost in modern life. This created a powerful psychological dynamic. Distance became depth. Foreignness became authority. Mystery became legitimacy. Most students had no practical way to evaluate what they were seeing. They could not read the original texts. They did not understand the history of the traditions. They did not know the institutional politics of the countries these teachers came from. They were largely dependent upon what they were told. Authority, therefore, arrived bundled together with uncertainty. And uncertainty tends to increase trust. Ironically, many people came to Zen because they wanted freedom from authority. They were disappointed with organized religion. They distrusted political institutions. They were skeptical of conventional social structures. Yet without realizing it, many simply exchanged one form of authority for another. This is one of the oldest patterns in human history. People flee one certainty only to seek another. They abandon one hierarchy only to build a new one. They reject one orthodoxy only to construct another. Zen communities were not immune to this pattern. In traditional Asian settings, teachers existed within larger institutional framework. They had peers. They had superiors. They had established systems around them. These systems were imperfect, sometimes deeply imperfect, but they provided friction. When Zen arrived in the West, much of that friction disappeared. Independent centers emerged. Retreat communities emerged. Organizations formed around individual teachers. The teacher gradually became the center of gravity. Once that happens, something subtle begins to unfold. The teacher is no longer viewed merely as an instructor. The teacher becomes a symbol. The teacher becomes proof that the practice works. The teacher becomes the embodiment of the path itself, and symbols are difficult to question. Not because questioning is forbidden, but because questioning threatens more than the individual. It threatens the structure built around the individual. This is where silence enters the picture. Silence rarely begins as censorship. It rarely begins as deliberate suppression. It begins as protection. Protection of harmony. Protection of community. Protection of reputation. Protection of stability. Imagine a student notices something troubling. Perhaps there is a contradiction between the teachings and the behavior of leadership. Perhaps there is favoritism. Perhaps there is simple confusion. In a healthy investigative culture, those questions would be welcomed, not because every concern is valid, but because examination itself is healthy. Yet many communities do not operate this way. Instead, tension is softened. Questions are redirected. Doubt is reframed. Certain phrases begin to appear. You are attached to your opinions. This is your ego resisting. You need more practice. You don't yet understand. Notice what these responses accomplish. The focus immediately shifts away from the question. The focus shifts back onto the questioner. Again, this does not require bad intentions. Many people sincerely believe they are helping. Many communities sincerely believe they are preserving something valuable. But structurally, the effect remains the same. The system becomes increasingly resistant to examination. Over time, a hierarchy of acceptable questions emerges. Small questions are welcomed. Practical questions are welcomed. Organizational questions may be tolerated. But foundational questions become uncomfortable. Questions about authority. Questions about legitimacy. Questions about institutional incentives. These become increasingly difficult to ask. Why? Because power prefers stability. Every system does. Not just Zen. The moment a structure forms, it develops a natural tendency towards self-preservation. Organizations want to survive. Communities want continuity. Leaders want legitimacy. Followers want certainty. All of these desires are understandable, but together they create a powerful force. The force is called institutional inertia. And institutional inertia often works against inquiry. Here we arrive at the safety problem. What happens when questioning becomes rare? Feedback loops weaken, blind spots expand, errors accumulate, and accountability diminishes. Most failures do not begin dramatically. They begin quietly, small compromises. Then those silences compound. History provides countless examples. Religious institutions, political organizations, corporations, social movements, spiritual communities. The pattern repeats because the mechanism is universal. If no one can question the system, how does the system discover its own mistakes? That question is far more important than most people realize. A truly healthy spiritual community is not one that never experiences disagreement. It is one that can survive disagreement without suppressing it. A healthy teacher is not one who is never questioned. It is one who does not fear questions. A healthy tradition is not one that avoids scrutiny. It is one that can withstand scrutiny. Yet many modern practitioners unknowingly equate harmony with health. They assume the absence of conflict means everything is functioning well. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it means nobody is speaking. This is why silence can be deceptive. Silence can look like peace. Silence can look like maturity. Silence can look like unity. But silence can also conceal confusion. It can conceal fear. It can conceal dependency. It can conceal institutional fragility. Zen traditionally emphasized direct seeing, seeing through illusion, seeing through assumptions, seeing through comforting narratives. Yet one of the great ironies of modern Zen is that many practitioners are encouraged to examine themselves relentlessly, while rarely examining the systems around them. Self-examination is valuable. Institutional examination is equally valuable. When both are present, clarity increases. When only one is present, imbalance emerges. So what happened? Practice became performance. Performance elevated symbols. Symbols concentrated authority. Authority discouraged disruption. Silence normalized itself. And once silence becomes normal, confusion gains a place to hide. Next time we will examine another transformation. How Zen gradually moved from a path aimed at liberation toward a culture increasingly focused on psychological well-being. Because once safety becomes the highest value, the purpose of a system begins to change. For now, sit quietly with this thought. When a question cannot be asked, something important is no longer being seen.